This is Right to Life Radio. And now, here's your host, John Gerardi.
All right. We got a lot of big California news to discuss, including a big proposal from Governor Newsom that took place on Wednesday of this week regarding assisting Arizona in helping them to keep providing abortions. So in order to explain what Governor Newsom's done, the sort of elevator pitch answer of what Governor Newsom did is he's giving temporary medical licensure to Arizona abortion doctors, temporary California medical licensure to Arizona abortion doctors so that they can come to California to perform abortions while Arizona's pre-Roe v. Wade and slightly post-Roe v. Wade law banning abortion has been allowed to come back into effect by a decision from the Arizona Supreme Court. Okay, so that's the basics. Arizona has a state law that was on the books before Roe, after Roe, that has come back into effect now that Roe v. Wade is overturned, outlawing abortion. Abortion doctors in Arizona are too nervous to keep performing abortions. They don't want to do something illegal. So California wants to allow abortion doctors to come to California to keep doing abortions. So we're going to explain what's going on with Arizona's laws, and then we're going to explain how ridiculous Governor Newsom's actions are here. All right, this proposed legislation that Governor Newsom had a big press conference to announce he was launching. All right, so here's the state of Arizona, or actually before it even formally became a state. Arizona adopted a law in 1864 to outlaw abortion. Most American states in this time frame, slightly before, during, and after the Civil War, adopted statutes to outlaw abortion. One, it was in response to new scientific discoveries about when mammal lives begin. Okay, this was only really discovered in the 1800s when people could see under a microscope with an animal sperm cell and an animal egg cell, boop, have the two meet. They form the zygote, which is actually the first cell of a new organism. People were not exactly sure when an organism's life actually began as its own unique living organism, not a piece of dad's body like a sperm cell, not a piece of mom's body like an egg cell and a sperm cell. These are gametes, but rather a new, unique organism that was its own entity, its own metabolism, its own pattern of growth and development, etc. Okay? So in the 1800s, this was discovered, and it led to this push by the American Medical Association, supported by Catholics, to pass explicit criminal statutes outlawing abortion. And this was also a time when American law was kind of changing. In the 1800s and into the 1900s, American law was changing away from totally relying on judge-made law, which we inherited from England in what's called the common law tradition. So the English common law tradition, yes, there were individual statutes passed by Parliament or issued by the king, but much of British law was judge-made. It was in the form of legal decisions looking at a controversy where a judge would issue a decision, and in that decision issue certain legal doctrines defining a certain kind of, let's say, for example, criminal offense. So our definition of murder that we have in the countries that were inheritors of the British common law tradition, like America, like Australia, like Taiwan, although I think Taiwan's legal system is now being kind of, Hong Kong, Hong Kong is a former British possession. I think Hong Kong's law, though, is now being swept away because the Chinese are exerting more influence over there. Anyway, all of these places that were former British possessions inherited this common law tradition. Now, in America, so America continued this with much of our law being in the form of judicial decisions from judges, and those just judicial decisions being applied to new cases and controversies as they arose through the system of stare decisis and precedent. Well, in the 1800s and then into the 1900s, stuff started changing with the process of what's called codification. Okay, instead of having your murder statute defined by, this judicial decision over here, and your burglary statute defined in this judicial decision over here, and your battery statute, your battery law defined by this judicial decision over there, they weren't actually statutes. They were judicial decisions. Your law regarding battery, your law regarding murder, your law regarding manslaughter. Instead of having it be defined by a whole bunch of random judicial decisions, state governments began codifying their bodies of law, criminal law, civil law, this, that, and the other. Codification literally means bookification, okay? Codex was one of the Latin words for book. So instead of having them be in random judicial decisions, write them down in numbered statutes and adopt them as a body that you can put in a book. So that's the codification movement, all right? So Arizona's law outlawing abortion was codified by the state of Arizona into its normal bodies of, I'm not sure if it was criminal statutes or whatever. So that 1864 law from Arizona outlawing abortion was reaffirmed by the state of Arizona multiple times, most recently in 1977, after Roe v. Wade. So Roe v. Wade has decided it renders Arizona's law outlawing abortion more or less null and void because they can't enforce it. But the Arizona legislature says, well, screw that. We don't think the Supreme Court was right. We're going to repass our existing law on abortion, and we'll keep it on the books. Arizona's state Supreme Court about a month ago ruled that, that 1977 recodification, reaffirmation of Arizona's historic anti-abortion law, now that Roe v. Wade has been overturned, is able to go into effect. So in Arizona now, technically, the law on the books is that all abortion is illegal except for procedures to save the mother's life. Well, this has resulted in liberals and, unfortunately, quite a few Republicans freaking out. Donald Trump has said this is too far. Carrie Lake, who's running for the U.S. Senate seat in Arizona this year, she says this is a bridge too far, which is sort of Carrie Lake sort of turning back on all of her prior abortion commitments. I think this is Donald Trump in various ways compromising on the abortion issue in ways that are really terrible. Trump is out of one side of his mouth saying that he's not going to, he doesn't think abortion's a federal issue. The states should handle it. Out of the other side of his mouth, though, he's intervening in unhelpful ways in state abortion controversies in Florida, in Arizona. Anyway. So, right now, technically on the books in Arizona, abortion is illegal. Abortion doctors in Arizona are therefore nervous about performing abortions. Why? Well, because in spite of the fact that I think there's very little likelihood of this law being enforced, okay, because the governor of Arizona is a Democrat who is opposed to this law coming into effect. The Attorney General of Arizona is a Democrat who is opposed to this law coming into effect. They're both pro-choice. They both think that this historic Arizona law is terrible. So what are the odds that one of these abortion doctors is going to get prosecuted? I don't know. It seems unlikely to me. Maybe an individual, I don't exactly know how the individual county by county district attorney system works in Arizona. Nonetheless, these Arizona abortion doctors don't want to risk it. They don't want to be doing a procedure that's illegal. They don't want the risk to their licenses. So Governor Newsom he announced earlier this week that he was introducing legislation to grant temporary licensure, California medical licenses, temporary California medical licensure to Arizona abortion doctors so they can come to California to perform abortions. Now, this is ludicrous. Even if you accept the false premise that abortion is somehow helpful to or serving women. And I'm saying that's a false premise, not just on my own basis as someone, based on my own priors as someone who is morally and politically opposed to abortion. I'm saying this on the basis of all of the studies we have, studies by the National Institutes of Health, others, say that the vast majority of women who have abortions don't want to have an abortion. They would rather keep the baby. They just feel financially pressured or otherwise pressured into having an abortion when they would rather keep their baby. Okay, so this idea that providing abortions to women is wholesale, that is what women need, we are providing women what they are seeking, what they need, is just, there's a fundamental dishonesty to that. But let's take that false premise at face value. Even if you accept the false premise that women need abortions and we should provide them with abortions, Governor Newsom giving temporary licensure to a bunch of abortion doctors from Arizona is doing nothing. This isn't facilitating all those women from Arizona being able to get abortions somehow. It's helping abortion doctors to keep making money. The women in Arizona would, if they want to have abortions, would still have to go out of state. It's not doing anything to address that. It's basically Governor Newsom trying to help out these abortion doctors so that they can keep on making money. That's what this is about. And by the way, let's just note, in the city of Fresno, in South Fresno neighborhoods, almost 25% of women get no prenatal care at all before they deliver their babies. Women in Madera County have to drive either to Merced or Fresno to deliver their children. They don't have a hospital anymore in Madera other than Valley Children's, which does not deliver babies. How badly, with how badly California is providing prenatal care for its lower income populations, actually allowing people to have babies, which, by the way, this dearth of prenatal care provision is basically, this dearth of prenatal care provision is part of what drives women into having abortions in the first place. If you're a Medi-Cal patient and you can't find a doctor who's willing to take you, or the first appointment you can get is 4 months from now, and you're in a financially precarious place, oh, but the state will pay for every dollar of your abortion. You can, walk into Planned Parenthood and get an abortion, in very quick time frame. Then of course you're going to be pushed more towards abortion. The sinful structure, if I can turn a phrase from John Paul II, who talks about structures of sin, the structure of California's public insurance market and what Medi-Cal funds and what Medi-Cal doesn't fund and what Medi-Cal pays well for and reimburses well for and what kinds of things are profitable for doctors to do versus what isn't profitable for them to do. The whole structure is pushing lower income women towards abortion. The vast majority of whom, again, don't want to have an abortion. They would rather keep their baby. They just feel like they don't have the financial means to keep their babies. With all of that happening in California, with all of this lack of provision of prenatal care, what is Governor Newsom bending over backwards, stretching and contorting himself like Stretch Armstrong to accomplish? Letting doctors in Arizona still make money. When we return, we'll talk about who the actual target audience is for all of this. Hint, it has to do with Governor Newsom someday running for president. Next on Right to Life Radio, a production of Right to Life of Central California, RTLCC.org. Back with Right to Life Radio, Governor Newsom earlier this week has announced that we are introducing into the California state, he and his allies are introducing into the California state legislature a new bill to provide temporary California medical licensure to Arizona abortion doctors while Arizona's long-standing, reaffirmed in 1977 abortion statute comes on the books. By the way, this is the thing that annoys me. All the media coverage of what's going on in Arizona, how basically their abortion statute that was on the books until Roe v. Wade has been allowed to come back into effect. They keep referring to it as their 1864 abortion statute, as if a law being passed in 1864 renders it invalid, which, two things. One, it's not true. The law that was passed in 1864 was reaffirmed several times by the Arizona State Legislature. The most recent time, as recently as 1977. Which is true of probably most provisions of criminal law in most states. Guess what? There was probably some original California anti-murder statute. We don't dismiss the California Penal Code section that deals with murder as being antiquated because it was first passed in the 1860s when California became a state. No, the murder has always been bad. That's why we had laws against it back in the 1860s. And probably, I believe this is still the case. I haven't looked at the murder statute in too long, but it still retains that historic common law murder definition. It's tweaked in various ways. But the fact that a statute is old does not make it thereby illegitimate somehow. So the Arizona statute has constantly been hit with that. People constantly say, "Oh, they put back on the books this, this Civil War era statute," as if the fact that it's Civil War era makes it illegitimate, which is both, again, one, false. It's a statute that was reaffirmed by a vote by the Arizona State Legislature as recently as 1977. So really, you should say this is a 1977 law. We have plenty of 1977 laws still on the books that are still legit. Two, even if it were just an 1864 law, that doesn't make it illegitimate. All right. With that said, Governor Newsom wants to give this temporary medical licensure in California to Arizona abortion doctors. It's not even really addressing the alleged problem of women in Arizona and where do they go for abortions. These guys are OBGYNs. Presumably, abortion is not the only thing they're going to do. I kind of doubt that these guys are going to pick up shop, come to or I doubt that very many of them, anyway, are going to pick up shop, come to California, and just do a bunch of abortions there. So who is this for? It's not really helping the women who allegedly need abortions. And again, we have solid empirical evidence to dispute the notion that that is actually what women want or need. In fact, most women report they don't want to have an abortion. They feel compelled or pressured to have abortions. So who is this really helping? Who is the audience for this action? My contention is that this is Governor Newsom doing a little dance for his donors. It's not exactly, a shocking political prognosticating opinion that Governor Newsom wants to run for president. Whether he's going to run for president this year, whether the Democrats can swap out Joe Biden at the Democrat convention in favor of Gavin Newsom, or whether he waits until 2028, Governor Newsom's going to run for president. Kind of inevitable. In order to do that, Newsom needs to placate the California extremely socially liberal donor class. This is the donor class that has advanced Governor Newsom all the way to being governor of California. It's the same donor class that advanced Kamala Harris all the way to being a U.S. senator from California and now vice president of the United States. These people are, the Willie Brown magic circle, the 5 ultra uber rich San Francisco families who have funded Gavin Newsom throughout his political career, chief among them the Getty family, with whom Newsom has a several generations relationship. Basically, Governor Newsom is trying to keep those people happy. And the way he does that is, I think the psychology of these people, I'm kind of gathering more and more. The psychology of these people is that they watch a lot of MSNBC. Okay. And they therefore view abortion bans as the most evil things on earth. They hate Ron DeSantis. And that sort of is characterizing a lot of what Gavin Newsom does. Gavin Newsom spends a lot of time worrying about other states than California. He spends a lot of time talking about how terrible Florida is, how terrible Texas is. He's now spending a lot of time talking about how terrible this Arizona law is. And he does these performative things that aren't really doing much of anything to help out anyone in California. Why? Why is he putting billboards up in Oklahoma to tell people they can come to California for abortions? Why? Because it perfectly fits the ideological preferences of his donor class. That's why. So that's what he is doing here, is he's showing them, look at what I'm doing my part in response to these horrible abortion bans. I'm doing my part. And I think that's really what's animating him here, because what he's doing is not even addressing really the actual problem very well that pro-choicers in Arizona are complaining about. It's not actually really doing much to facilitate women in Arizona being able to go get abortions in California. All it's really doing is kind of helping. Presumably, it won't be all Arizona abortion doctors. Maybe some Arizona abortion doctors will be able to come to California, set up shop, and do abortions with some temporary licensure scheme. Which, by the way, any doctor I've mentioned this to is like offended at the very thought that we're going to just like licensure, state medical licensure requires you to jump through quite a few hoops and pay a lot of, licensure fees. And it's not just, snap your fingers and you can start practicing medicine in another state. There's some hoops you got to jump through. And the fact that he's just going to do this willy-nilly just so these people can perform abortions. I mean, it's just a kind of mind-boggling thing that he is this committed. All right, when we return, we'll talk a little bit about some of my thoughts from the California March for Life, other stuff going on with abortion politics nationally and statewide, a lot of Supreme Court cases. That is next on Right to Life Radio. There's a lot of stuff going on right now at the Supreme Court. There's Supreme Court's hearing cases about the state U.S. versus Idaho, in which the Supreme Court is trying to decide whether or not federal law requiring certain kinds of emergency health care would therefore require even hospitals in states where abortion is illegal, would require emergency rooms in hospitals in those states to provide abortions. So it has to do kind of with these questions of, is abortion necessary emergency medical care? And there was this crazy admission made, or remarkable, not crazy because it's something we've always thought is true, but kind of a very remarkable admission that was made at the Supreme Court, and it's about whether or not abortions are necessary late in pregnancy. So the Solicitor General of the United States is basically the person who, Elizabeth Prelogar is her name. And the Solicitor General of the United States is basically the lead appellate attorney who represents the United States government in cases in front of significant appellate courts and in front of the Supreme Court. All right. So being the Solicitor General is a really important job within the structure of, I'm not sure if she's part of the Department of Justice or if she's under the Attorney General. I think she's under the Attorney General. So it's a really important job, and it's usually these absolute super duper star lawyers who are really excellent appellate attorneys. The Attorney General is the head of the DOJ, but the Solicitor General is the person who's actually physically standing there in front of the Supreme Court arguing on behalf of the U.S. government what the U.S. government's legal position is in some legal case or controversy in which the U.S. government is a party, okay? So this is a case where the Biden administration is trying to aggressively interpret certain kinds of federal law regarding federal funding for hospitals and emergency rooms in different states and basically saying, we're going to cut you off from any federal funding, from certain kinds of federal funding, if you don't do emergency abortions. And the state of Idaho is objecting to this and saying, hey, abortion's illegal here in Idaho. These regulations that you're purporting to interpret here don't require us to do abortions. It requires us to do within our ERs whatever capacity our ERs have. And the capacity of our ERs is defined in part by what state law is, okay? State law does not allow abortions. Therefore, our ERs don't have to do them. We're complying with federal law. Your interpretation of federal law, Biden administration, is wrong. Okay. So Attorney General Prelogar is arguing this before the Supreme Court. So this involves all kinds of arguments about all kinds of different things. Are abortions ever medically necessary to save the mother's life? It involves interpreting the regulations. It involves talking about what is and is not emergency care. Now, one of the most common questions I get on the ground, like when I'm talking to teenagers about abortion, one of the most common questions I get is, well, what about abortions when you have to save the mother's life? And the response I give, and that we've given frequently, is that direct abortion is not necessary to save the mother's life. There are some circumstances where the pregnancy needs to end and the baby needs to get out of the mom. Often this is happening later in pregnancy, second and third trimesters, okay? And often this is happening at or around or after viability, which is approximately, given most modern medical technology available in NICUs in the US, around 22, 23, 24 weeks gestation. Basically, what pro-lifers have been consistently reiterating is that abortion is not necessary to deal with those conditions. Premature delivery is actually more indicated than abortion. Now, there may be a circumstance where you're prematurely delivering a baby that you very reasonably expect is not going to survive, but that is very different from a direct intended induced abortion. If you know mom is going to die unless she receives this treatment of ending her pregnancy, so you try to deliver the baby, you do everything you can to give the baby a fighting chance, maybe the baby survives, maybe the baby doesn't. That is very different from giving the baby a huge dosage of digoxin so that the baby's heart stops beating, and or performing a D&E abortion to remove the child, not to be gross, but this is what happens in a second and third trimester abortion, to remove the child limb from the mother's body, okay? Premature delivery is actually more indicated in many ways. We have argued this for forever. Premature delivery is actually more preferentially indicated because it can be done more quickly. You can do a C-section delivery very quickly, relatively speaking, whereas usually it takes about a 2 or 3 day process to prepare a woman's body for a second or third trimester abortion. So we have always testified, pro-life OBGYNs have always testified that abortion is never, direct induced abortion, where the purpose is to kill the baby, is never genuinely necessary. Never. Neonatologists have said this. OBGYNs have said this. OBGYNs have said, in my 40 years of doing practice, I never had to abort a child. I never had to choose between the mom's life and the baby's life. And this gets disputed by the pro-choice side. The pro-choice side constantly frames abortion bans as something that's going to lead to women dying. And that's just false. It's just baloney. The Solicitor General of the United States actually had to concede, who is appointed by a Democrat president. Okay, the Solicitor General is appointed by the president. This is a Biden appointee. She is reliably, consistently advancing the position of the executive branch of the U.S. government as headed by Joseph. What's his middle name again? He has some weird middle name. Robinette? Look that up, producer Colton. She is representing the interests of Joseph Biden as the president of the United States, as the head of the executive branch. So this is a dyed-in-the-wool liberal lawyer advancing a liberal position, trying to coerce emergency rooms around America into performing, quote, emergency abortions. And she admits this. She says, there can be pregnancy complications that happen after viability, but the standard of care is to deliver the baby if you need the pregnancy to end because of consequences for the mom. So she admits that in post-viability complication scenarios, actually, in post-viability abortion scenarios, the preferred course of treatment, the indicated course of treatment, is actually to deliver the baby, not to abort the baby. Now, congressional Democrats have for years been introducing, and Biden has committed to passing, if he is elected president. Yeah, and yes, it is Joseph Robinette Biden. Thank you. Thank you, Producer Colton. Producer Colton had a more rude interpretation of his middle name first in sending it to me via text. Very good, Producer Colton. All right. Now, the Democrats have been pushing this legislation. Basically, ever since Roe v. Wade got overturned, what Democrats want to do is once again make abortion legal for all 40 weeks of pregnancy for any reason nationwide. And so before, they had been able to do that through the mechanism of Roe v. Wade, a Supreme Court decision that purported to interpret the U.S. Constitution in a way that applied to all the states. Now they want to do it by means of a federal statute that would basically override all individual contrary state statutes, okay, a federal law. And this law, the Women's Health Protection Act, which Democrats have been hawking for the last several years, Democrats almost were able to get it passed in the first few years of the Biden administration. Had it not been for Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema refusing to get rid of the filibuster rule in the Senate, Biden and the Democrats would have passed this. The Women's Health Protection Act would create an absolute right to abort a child before fetal viability. However, it would also allow for abortion after viability if the mother's health demands it. And this is a really significant thing. There is no actual physical health reason to perform abortions after viability. That's what the Biden administration has just admitted. There isn't an actual reason to perform abortions after a fetus is viable. There's no reason to perform abortions, therefore, in the third trimester. Okay, it's basically around the end of the second trimester is when someone's viable. Okay, there's no reason to do so. So, actually, it's a little bit into the second trimester, about 22, 23 weeks. So, what are we even talking about then with allowing abortions after viability for health? Well, it just means we're going to provide abortions on the basis of a vague sense of someone's mental health. All the reasons that were given in Doe versus Bolton, which was Roe v. Wade's companion case, saying when abortions could happen late in pregnancy for a health reason. Someone's familial health. My family dynamic is upset by this baby. Mental health, psychological health, etc. So it's a really remarkable thing for the Biden administration to admit this. This is something we pro-lifers have been saying for years, that there is no reason, there is no medical necessity to provide an abortion, particularly after fetal viability. There is absolutely no reason to do so. When we return, we will discuss more about this, more about what's going on in California. I'll share some experiences from the California March for Life. That is next on Right to Life Radio. Back with Right to Life Radio. One of the cool things we did earlier this week through Right to Life of Central California is we took a bus full of folks to the California March for Life in Sacramento, which was a really cool experience. We got to go with some college kids and some high school kids and basically got to show them around the state capitol. We got to go to the different members of the Assembly and State Senate's offices and talk with staff. We ran into Vince Fong, the Assembly member from Bakersfield, who talked with us and shared a couple things with us. So that was really neat. And basically the way the California March for Life works is you gather in front of the steps of the Capitol, you hear from a couple of speakers, you march around the Capitol. And before that, we got there a little early, so we were able to walk around the Capitol building, walk around, see legislators and all that. So it was a really good experience. And kind of, I think one of the things that was really being highlighted was the great work that pro-life clinics and pregnancy centers do in the state of California, which is precisely the kinds of people that Governor Newsom and Attorney General Bonta are sort of rattling their sabers at. Attorney General Bonta is rattling his saber at allegations that there are pro-life pregnancy centers that are not licensed clinics performing ultrasounds. I find that extremely unlikely that such a thing is happening. I know a lot of these people run these centers. They're trying to do things by the book, trying to do things legally. Rob Bonta, by the way, this phenomenon I talked about earlier in the show that, why is Gavin Newsom trying to, give licensure to Arizona abortion doctors now that their state's anti-abortion statutes come back into effect? Why is he doing all this? He is dancing like a trained monkey for his donors. He wants to become president someday. He needs all these ultra-wealthy California Democrat donors to give him money in order to accomplish that. Well, Rob Bonta needs and wants the same thing. Rob Bonta wants to be the governor of California. Okay, he wants to run for governor in 2026. And so he's doing a bunch of really performative things on behalf of the abortion cause and looking at all kinds of, basically on behalf of the abortion cause, he is rattling his saber at pro-life pregnancy resource centers, which in the eyes of, again, you have to remember this, that these ultra-wealthy Democrat donors, I'm convinced, they're just very conventionally left-wing people. They're like daily MSNBC viewers. They, at the very least, I get this sense from them. They view Ron DeSantis as the great boogeyman, so they're delighted when Gavin Newsom debates him. They think Florida is terrible, so they're glad when Newsom takes pot shots against them. And they're not like Bernie Sanders-esque sort of socialists. They don't want people reaching into their pocket that much. And it seems like they compensate for their phony, fiscal liberalism by being even more aggressively socially liberal. So even more firmly committed to the abortion cause. And so to paint pro-life pregnancy resource centers who do tons of incredible work, many of them absolutely for free, totally donor supported at no cost to people, to slam those kinds of entities, to slam entities like our Obria clinic here in Fresno, it just fills these aggressive left-wing donors with delight. And I think that's what's happening. Rob Bonta wants to be wants to be governor, rather. And so he's trying to delight these donors. That will do it for Right to Life Radio. We will see you guys next time on Power Talk.